Hello and welcome to another TLDR UK video. We've been speaking about May 6th a lot on the channel lately. It's the day when Britain heads to the polls to vote for, well, a lot. There's the local elections, the police and crime commissioner elections, whatever they are. There's the London mayoral elections, as well as mayoral elections across the country, the Scottish parliamentary elections, and most importantly for this video, the Welsh parliamentary elections. In order to understand this year's Welsh Senedd elections, we need to go back and understand why this kind of election even exists, what the candidates are actually standing for, and what power they'll have to change things if they win. Before we start, I am pleased to announce that because TLDR is growing, we're moving office into a new, bigger space. That means we have to move a lot of stuff though, so we're holding an office clearance sale. All of our merch is discounted, including all of our badges for only $3.99. But we're also selling office things like our sofa and our fridge. No, seriously, we're selling them. So check out the store if you want a pin or even our sofa. It's linked in the description. So the best place to start is why Wales has a devolved parliament in the first place. And that means going back to every primary school child's favourite historical figure. Ever since King Henry VIII, Wales was treated as simply another part of England, and considering that it only actually became part of England due to an English invasion, it's not hard to see why a Welsh separatist movement emerged. This pro-independence movement made some progress in the 19th and 20th century, but the biggest change happened under Tony Blair in the late 1990s. The 1997 Labour Party manifesto included the following line: Wales has its language and cultural traditions. We will meet the demand for decentralisation of power to Scotland and Wales once established in referendums. So following their landslide victory, a devolution referendum was called the very same year. The result of this referendum was 50.3% agreeing to the creation of the Welsh Assembly and 49.7% opposing. In 1998, the Labour government passed the Government of Wales Act. Largely, the power of the Assembly was to simply create secondary legislation. This meant that they weren't allowed to introduce any new acts, simply amend pre-existing ones. The Assembly was additionally only able to pass secondary legislation in specific policy areas. These were areas broadly similar to those that the Welsh Secretary had powers over previously. This includes agriculture, fisheries, education, housing, and highways. In fact, most people summarise this first major step in the history of devolution as a simple transfer of powers from the Welsh Secretary to the Welsh Assembly. The first elections of the Welsh Assembly took place in 1999. In total, 60 seats were up for grabs, and Labour won a plurality, with them winning 28 seats. Plaid Cymru, the Welsh National Party, came second, with 17 seats. That means that Labour didn't win a majority, so they formed a coalition with the Liberal Democrats. Following this election, the Welsh Assembly started using their power. There was a lot of criticism, though, about the fact that there was no clear distinction between the executive and the legislature. So, in 2006, the Government of Wales was separated from the Assembly. This separated their powers and made the Welsh Government accountable to the Assembly. It also allowed the Welsh Assembly to pass legislation, not just amend it, albeit with the approval of Westminster. In 2011, another referendum took place, which asked the Welsh public whether they backed allowing the Welsh Assembly to create legislation in devolved areas without requiring the approval of the Westminster government. The result of the referendum was 63.5% of voters backing the new devolution agreement. So the Welsh Assembly was able to pass primary legislation in 20 policy areas. Over the next few years, more powers were given to the Welsh Assembly, including over taxation and how their members were elected. Additionally, in 2020, the Assembly changed their name to Senedd Cymru, or Welsh Parliament. So from here on out, that's what we'll be referring to it as. So that was a quick history of Welsh devolution, but what does it mean in 2021? What are the Welsh electorate actually voting on, and why is it important? Well, it's actually all especially important at the moment because of COVID. Due to the devolution we've discussed, Wales has a number of powers, including over health. Additionally, the Coronavirus Act of 2020 gave ministers in the Welsh Government more powers. In effect, the Welsh Government has the power to plot Wales's route through the pandemic, including imposing and lifting lockdowns. In addition to those powers, Mark Drayford, the Welsh First Minister, has attended Cobra meetings with the Prime Minister and the leaders of the other devolved administrations. As a result, if you live in Wales and have an opinion on the Welsh Government's response to the pandemic, then this is your chance to have your voice heard. You can hold your government to account for the decisions they've made on this and other issues, because this is just on top of the vast array of powers that the Welsh Government already has over education, the environment, tourism, social welfare, culture, and so much more. The point we're trying to make here is that if you live in Wales, then the Senedd elections are mightily important, and you absolutely should ensure that your voice is heard. This is especially important at the moment, though, because of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. Let's assume that we've convinced you, because we did, right? You want to vote, but how does it work? What voting system is used, and who exactly can cast a ballot? The Senedd uses the additional member voting system, and has done since its inception, despite some discussion about moving towards a more proportional system. Under AMS, each voter has 2 votes. The first is used in a similar way to the general elections in Westminster voting, with the voter selecting a local candidate to represent their area. It's a first-past-the-post vote, so there's no preferences, and whichever candidate gets the greatest number of votes becomes the member of the Welsh Senedd for that constituency. The second vote is used in a regional closed party list. For this one, voters select the party they want to win. Again, it's not a preferential vote, so voters only put 1 cross in a box. The system then uses the D'Hondt method for counting votes and attributing them proportionally. In total then, each voter has 5 members representing them, 1 local and 4 regional. To be able to vote, you obviously need to be able to live in Wales and be registered. However, one more notable thing from this year's election is that due to the Senedd Election Act of 2020, 16 and 17-year-olds will be able to vote for the first time. This is the biggest expansion of the franchise in Wales since 1969, so it'll be interesting to see what impact it ends up having. So that's how voting works and how you can vote, but what's currently happening in the Welsh Government, and who's expected to win based on polling? Well, some of you may know that Mark Drayford is currently the First Minister of Wales, and is the leader of the Welsh Labour Party, who currently hold 29 of the 60 seats. At the moment, they're in coalition with the 1 Liberal Democrat member and an independent, with them together holding a majority. The Conservative Party are the current opposition in Wales, with a total of only 11 seats. The most recent polling at the time of writing suggests that this isn't going to change too much, with the Labour Party still ahead in most of the polls. The composition of the Senedd following the election is projected to be, again, a hung parliament. And if the most recent polls are correct, then Labour would be short of a majority by 7, not just 2 like last time. This would make forming a coalition much more essential, but notably more difficult. They wouldn't be able to simply form a coalition with the Liberal Democrats and an independent, as the Liberal Democrats are only expected to get 1 seat, and even if Labour formed a coalition with them, they'd still be 6 seats short. So either they'd have to form a minority government, which comes with serious challenges, or they'd have to look at the possibility of a coalition with either Plaid Cymru or the Conservatives. 2 options which seem incredibly unlikely. Anyway, this is all mere speculation, and we don't actually know what's going to happen until election day itself. So subscribe to the channel so that we can loop back and update you with the results. Oh, and if you are able to vote, please make sure you do. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.